Go team. My name is Walt, and we're coming today from the Bamf podcast. And today we are joined by an esteemed panel of writers, of artists, and general masters of mayhem in regards to Golden Age comics and World War II style stories. I'm going to start from my left and move over to my right. We have from the webcomic The Specialists, now on Kickstarter, we have Al Fukalik. How are you, sir?
Good, thanks. Good to be here.
Thank you. And we have Dennis from Heroic Publishing. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. I apologize that I don't have a camera set up here.
That's okay. You have a radio voice, so that more than makes up for it.
Oh, well, thank you. I think.
If the comics thing doesn't work out, definitely have a career in NPR.
I'll let them know about that. Maybe I could do some of their, bridges on their not ads.
There you go. And last but not least, we have also from the webcomic The Specialists, we have Sean Gustafson. How are you, sir?
Good. How you doing? Hello.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
You actually did it perfectly, yeah.
All right. I had a friend with the same last name, and I just wanted to make sure it was the same. Otherwise, I'd stand here embarrassed for about 30 seconds and try and get over it.
That's fine.
So today we're talking about World War II style stories. What is it that drew you guys to this particular time period? Can we start off with Al?
Well, for me personally, I've always been interested in World War II, just separate, completely separate from comics. Just in terms of documentaries, I had my grandfathers all fought in World War II, so I got a chance to hear some stories, various points. So that was my main interest, and I've always sort of had an affinity for Captain America, who is the quintessential World War II superhero.
Dennis, how about yourself?
For people in my generation and the absent Steve Perrin's generation, World War II was just a part of life. We weren't born during it, but all of our uncles, our aunts, our fathers, they were all involved in it. It was there. And in the comic books, World War II was the birth of the superhero. So if you have a love of comics, then World War II is a part of your life, I think. And that's what drew me to it, because when we were creating the characters for the Heroic Published universe, there needed to be a history for them, and it seemed the obvious thing to do to make World War II a part of that history.
Nice. Sean, how about yourself?
Well, I agree with a lot of what both Al and Dennis said. I always have felt like World War II makes a sort of an ideal setting for superheroes. I feel like the whole thing was just so larger than life. And the Nazis just make amazing villains. I often have said that if the Nazis weren't real and someone had written a story about Nazis as villains, people wouldn't believe it because they're just so ridiculously evil. They actually, it's all black leather. They actually have skulls on their uniforms. Taken out of context, it just seems silly. They seem like comic book villains, but they were real. So I feel like you kind of can't go wrong in World War II because there's such villainy on one side and such heroism on the other side.
Now, how do you approach stuff like that in a comic when you have, typically you have costumed heroes running around, stomping bank robbers, but when you have superheroes who are normally so opposed to the taking of life and so dedicated to the preservation of life, and they enter a theater like war, how do you deal with that?
For us, it was really a different. It was a sort of a completely different paradigm. I mean, in a way, our superhero characters aren't superheroes in that sense, where they're concerned with preserving life. They are soldiers. They're super soldiers. So there's definitely death in our comic, and in fact, that's kind of one of the themes that we have is that war is often presented in this very sort of sanitized way. In our story, it's through the World War II propaganda posters. And things like the comic books or the radio serials that made it all seem like just a grand adventure. But then once some of our civilian characters actually get into battle and they realize that it's a much more hellish experience and that people really do die and kill and are maimed. So we basically just sidestepped the idea of sort of the non-lethal superheroes and turned them more into super soldiers.
Dennis, can you talk about how Heroic Publishing tackles some of that?
Well, when I started this, I wanted to tackle that from more of a historical context. Much of what you talk about, the pure evil and the wonderful heroism of the other side, has a lot to do with how the propaganda of the war was perceived in this country. Nazis were very bad people, but not all Germans were Nazis. The historical context of how the United States got involved in the war, what the United States was doing before it actually got involved in the war, how the war really broke out in Europe, and before that in China. World War II started in 1936, not in 1938. Part of what the Vanguard of Freedom is designed to do is to touch on those early years before comics actually started being published. Our history with characters such as Dr. Arcane, the original Giant, Dark Malice, the Golden Warrior actually begins as far back as 1932. So we're covering some of those years that lead up to where the traditional histories of World War II begin. And we're touching on the years before that. If Steve were here, he would probably mention the fact that the Berlin Olympics figure into a game that he's going to be running starting in about a month and a half. That campaign will begin in Berlin in 1936, well before the war begins in Europe. So when you're talking about the Vanguard of Freedom, for example, it's not actually the name of the organization. The heroes who are involved in that are in the Vanguard of Freedom, which is where the name comes from. They are fighting the Nazis before officially being involved in war hostilities. So they are in the Vanguard of Freedom, if you see what I'm saying.
Yes, sir.
And as we develop that, I want to continue to touch on the actual historical events, try to explain what was going on, how it developed, what happened. I don't know how much of that I'm going to be able to do in the context of superhero stories, but I'm going to give it a try.
Now, talking about stories like that begin just ahead of the war and whatnot is actually a pretty good and pretty interesting way to develop into tabletop role-playing games, stories that people can use at their table to get their characters into the war. Speaking of tabletop role-playing games, we were talking just before the show, and Sean, you had mentioned that The Specialists, the comic that you guys produce, has some of its origins in the role-playing game Savage Worlds. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Al and I went to college together back in the early 90s. Al had come from Ohio, but his family had moved to Colorado for a few years, and so we met in college and we bonded over role-playing games. Al was wearing a Rifts T-shirt when I met him, and that's how we.
And you still talk to him.
That's what I like.
I was young. I was,
It sounds like those old college. I was young. It was everybody was doing it.
Everyone experimented a little bit.
That's right.
I myself too. Yeah, I got you.
But so we we bonded over our geeky passions, role-playing games and comic books, and so then we started doing some collaboration on our own comics. Anyway, I'm getting the story's becoming long, but so that's how Al and I met, and then Al ended up moving back to Ohio, and so then about 6 years ago, Al and his wife were going to come and visit my wife and I, and so since we were going to be seeing each other for the first time in a while, we thought, well, hey, let's play a game. Let's do a role playing game. And as we started talking about it, we thought, well, what should we play? And we used to like to play a lot of superhero games like the Marvel superheroes, system, and so we thought, let's do a superhero game. And then that also gave us the opportunity to make up our own characters because we enjoy collaborating on these kinds of projects, and we hadn't really done anything like that for a while. So we thought, yeah, let's put together some characters, and that's how the whole thing started. And we started designing characters and kind of creating the relationships between them and their backstories and everything. And we really liked the characters and felt like we had a real interesting story that we were putting together. And so we thought, well, we don't want to just do this, we don't want to waste this whole idea on just one evening of gaming. We should do something with it. And so at first we were actually going to try to make an RPG supplement out of it. And that just kind of didn't come together because of me, frankly. I just wasn't getting stuff done the way I should. So then we shifted gears over to doing a webcomic, and that was a great decision because we've been working on it now for I think is it 6 years in June?
It's going on 6, yeah.
Yeah. So and it's been a great project. It's kept Al and I in touch, which is fantastic. It's given us something that we can work on together. It's been a creative outlet for me, and it's I'm really proud of it, and really just enjoy everything about it.
Sean, what's the URL of the webcomic?
It's thespecialistscomic.com.
Okay, I will write that down and take a look.
We're also going to put it in the show notes too, so that when the page goes big on the magical interwebs, the YouTubes, they'll have all the links that are fit to click right there in front and center. And speaking of the specialists and the specialistcomic.com, we have a Kickstarter running right now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and give us a little background on the specialists so that when people hear this, they get all fired up.
Al, you want to go? I've been monopolizing this conversation.
Okay. Well, the elevator pitch for the specialist is this. There's it's 1946 and the war is still raging. The Nazis have, through various means such as the occult and eugenics, have created a team of super soldiers called the Übermenschen, and they're winning the war. So the Allies, in order to fight back, are forced to create their own team of super soldiers powered by the atom, and this is where our I think we have eight team members come together to try and to stop the Nazis, and they're all from various backgrounds and with various different histories and approaches. Currently, we've been going for 5 years now, or like you said, almost 6 years. We're in the midst of chapter 5 now. We plan to have 12 chapters altogether, and so the Kickstarter is a collection of the first 4 chapters of the book. It's what we consider to be book 1. So it's a collection. It's going to be about 280 some pages. It's going to be soft cover. It's going to be full of extra material that isn't available anywhere else. And we've got lots of extras, some fantastic print artwork that we've commissioned from various other webcomic artists, and I think there's a lot of cool stuff for people that are fans of the comic or have no experience with it whatsoever. I've had a lot of people that have discovered it through Kickstarter, didn't know anything about it, and have decided to back it, which is pretty gratifying.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I had I was looking for World War II research material, and I stumbled along the comic and the Kickstarter, and I'm like, oh my God, look at this. The first thing that caught me was the art, and as I was saying just before the show, the art has a very vibrant feel, and it allows you to feel like you're in a comic book, but it doesn't take away from the storytelling. So it really conveys the action, the information, and with a style like this, the amount of emotion that comes through in the characters is visually and stunningly represented. It's really well done. Yeah, absolutely. And you guys have said that you have a 6-year release schedule. that you've been doing this so far, and it seems like your schedule has been pretty regular. That you guys release on Mondays, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we do every Monday, and I'm pretty proud of the fact, and I know Sean is too, that we've never missed an update in the entire 6 years that we've been doing it. We've had some times when we've taken some time off and gone on hiatus, usually around Christmas or thereabouts. But we've always updated every Monday. We said we were going to update, which is it's pretty rare for a webcomic these days. And normally you'll get webcomics that go pretty strong for a couple of years and then disappear altogether or don't update anymore or whatever. But we've been pretty consistent in that regard.
Yeah, it seems really cool.
Thank you. I give all the credit for that to Al. If it weren't for Al, that wouldn't have happened.
The going back to the emotion that we were talking about a second ago, it wasn't this week's release, but it was the previous week's release where we have some stuff going on with a shaving razor, and I got to tell you,
potato peeler,
the potato peeler. There we go. Yep. Yep, he's in the thing and he's peeling potatoes, and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, that is creepy. I mean, I saw that page and I'm just like, that is messed up. And to have a comic affect you like that, that's kudos. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Well.
Yeah, you really got to check it out. I mean, when it was much like when I was reading the preview comic that you generously put up for our Kickstarter, Against the Axis. You have this big splash panel with I think it's Liberty Girl. She gets into this big like Aztec huge like complex. That page was wow. So much detail, big huge two-page like splash print. It was very well done.
Let's talk about the Against the Axis.
Yeah, all right. What can you tell us?
Were you talking about Liberty Girl, though? I mean, did you have a question about Liberty Girl? Or?
No. I was just saying that it's nice when a comic invokes a certain response, because you can get people that you can get artists that they can get all the flash and colors and nowadays with stuff like Cintiq and you can get all these special effects and everybody's always hitting the lens flare button. But to actually convey real emotion or a real sense of wonder. And I think that the Specialists and the preview comic that is up right now for Liberty Girl, they do that. They give you that sense of wonder and an immersion of being in World War II. Like some of the scenes where she's visiting certain officials in the beginning of the book.
Oh yes, dropping in on Harry Truman,
right?
Which actually takes place after the war. The war.
But you get
and
that.
She has her own opinion about the little haberdasher.
Exactly.
And it's not. Yeah.
The great thing about it, initially, the thing that caught me was the blending of the very kind of superhero, not superhero, guy in suit authoritarian facing off against a superhero that is not exactly defined within the box, and you get that. I really enjoyed the panels where she's interacting with all these, men of the world, and they're in their pinstripe suits, and you really feel like you're dealing with authoritarians and political officials from the time period. It's really nice. It's the same thing with the Specialist comic. A lot of the costumes and a lot of the attire that you have, period specific, and it really adds to that immersion. So it's really nice. Can you talk about designing? Can you guys talk about designing for the time period?
You did that addressed to me or to?
I'd say
you guys take it.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll go around the table.
I'll let Al take this because I just want to say that Al does all this research into the styles of the time, and he's constantly blowing me away with his costume designs and everything. Not only do they look nice, but they're so accurate and appropriate for the time. But take it away, Al.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for, in a story that takes place in a specific time, be uh, it ought to visually represent that accurately. Now, I tell people that, even though it's set in the 40s, it's an alternate history. So I don't think we've ever been slaves to 100% historical accuracy, just because um, I'm not entirely interested in spending all my time researching. But the internet is a great resource for that sort of thing. I mean, normally you'd have to go, to the library and look up books of, history or whatever to get, what did women wear at that time? I mean, drawing, in the 40s, all the guys wore suits and ties and fedoras and everything. So, that's easy enough in a sense. But women's fashions were different. And it was important to me to get since so much of the story takes place within the military, it was important to me to get the uniforms right too. So and that was just a matter of finding some good resources. I have 2 or 3 books that I'm constantly referring to that show the equipment and the uniforms and that sort of thing. And the German uniforms too, which are very distinct. And I'm not sure that very many people would be upset if the details weren't exactly right, but it's been important to us to make sure that we get as close as we can to it, just because I feel like it helps you immerse the reader into the story if the details are sufficiently accurate and close to the time.
For me on that subject, I rely on the skills of the artists who do the stories to get it right. When I notice an anachronism, I assume that other people will notice the anachronism, and I ask the artist to correct that. If I don't notice it, then I assume that other people won't notice it, and it won't matter. Is it fair to guess that that's basically the way that you proceed as well?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain things. I mean, obviously, well, we've got a super science element in the story too, which allows us to get away with a little bit of stuff that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to the time period. Giant robots being one, and jetpacks and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And so we can get away with a certain amount of science fiction-y fantasy type elements, but there have been a few times when readers have very helpfully pointed out some things that we got wrong, and we had to go back in, and we didn't have to, but we felt like it was important to go back in and change to make sure. Yeah, which can be a hassle, but in order to present the story the way we want to do it, we feel like we ought to give it a little bit more effort to make sure that it's as close as we can get it.
Yeah,
You
the
also
thing.
mentioned
Oh, I'm
that
sorry. Go
a
ahead.
lot of this stuff came out of a role-playing game that you did, and that's interesting to me because much of the material that eventually ended up in the heroic publishing titles was derived from role-playing game activity, which is part of the reason that I was so keen when Steve suggested the idea to make the World War II characters from our comics available for As Against the Axis book. I haven't had a venue to give back to the role-playing game community for a while, and this seemed like a wonderful opportunity to do that.
And a lot of those stories are coming out of Hero Games Champions, correct?
Not coming out of Hero Games Champions so much. Many of the characters that were originally in the Champions comic book were created for the Champions role-playing game, but they were licensed directly from their creators, and it's kind of difficult to say how much of the Champions role-playing game actually went into the comic books. I would say not really that much, aside from the character conceptions and maybe initially a few things that were suggested by the rules. It's really a comic book. I mean, it's a comic book with characters that were created for role-playing games, but it's still a comic book. It's not really an adaptation of the Champions role-playing game as Eclipse tried to market it in the beginning. Never has been.
Got it. Now, being time period specific stories that you guys are telling with some of these books, and of course the web series, um, how do you deal with crossover of a timeline that's already happened? So, for example, say you got is it Henry's character in The Specialist that has the robot? No, it's Max. It's Max.
It's Max. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So say, in a story, Max goes stomping around somewhere and somebody, some combat photographer somewhere gets a photograph of him, and at the same time, maybe the invasion of Normandy is going on. Do you guys line up the timelines? How do you reconcile the big events that have happened in when the stories are supposed to be going on to what really happened?
Well, we kind of cheated in that we start our story actually after the war ended in real life.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it.
That's right. So pretty much, and in fact, clearly in our story, a lot of those events were affected. Like for instance, the help me out, Al. I can't think of. I'm missing words now. But what was the big battle in Russia that?
The turning point in our timeline, I think, was would have been Leningrad.
Yeah.
So the Battle of Leningrad in our story is when the Nazis really first started using their Übermenschen, and that was the first. So in our
You mean
in our
Stalingrad?
universe.
Stalingrad, the siege of Stalingrad. Is
Yes,
that what you mean?
sorry, yes, yes. Stalingrad, in our reality, the Nazis ended up being beaten quite badly, and it was kind of a turning point. But in the Specialist, that goes quite differently, and where the Nazis used the Übermenschen to actually completely alter that event and that battle.
And so it was because they were successful there and then continued to be successful. The war has lasted longer than it did in real life, and so we basically just said, well, our story starts at the very end of 1945, and so we don't have any real crossover to real events within our story itself. Any of that stuff happened, previously. So it's a cheat.
Dennis, would
For
you
me,
like?
for me, it's the opposite. I'm assuming that World War II played out in much the same way that it did in the real world. For the Allied superheroes, they were Nazi counterparts, and as far as the big events go, they basically neutralized each other. So you have the same sort of thing. If I were ever to deal with the siege of Stalingrad, I would probably explain how it was that the supply line that ran over the frozen lake was not disrupted by the Axis heroes, how the Axis villains were stopped by the Russian heroes who kept that supply train going into Stalingrad. Roy Thomas took a slightly different approach in his book Anthem, which we managed to publish 5 issues of. I guess that would be just a little bit before your webcomic came out, you other guys. But Roy assumed basically the same kind of premise where the Nazis and the Japanese had come up with super technology from aliens, and in order to stop them from winning the war, Roosevelt authorized a program that would develop superheroes for the United States. Mm-hmm. At the point where that series begins, the Japanese have taken the West Coast, the Nazis have taken the East Coast, all that's left is the heartland of America. And if the heroes of Project Anthem aren't able to drive them back, then we have a real problem here in the U.S. Different approach. Roy doesn't want to be bound by historical events in that series if it ever continues. So he feels free to ignore anything that happens after the Nazis bring their alien technology into play.
Sure.
Nice. There were a lot of events that really, I don't know, media at the time and the newspapers at the time really didn't sensationalize that. When you hear about them this many years later, you just sit there and you're just like, that is amazing that is real. Like, I think it's the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment. It was an all-black regiment that was actually dispatched to California to fight forest fires. The Japanese had flown over some balloon bombs or something like that.
I remember
Right?
that.
So, I mean, stuff like that is such great, bringing it back to the beginning of the podcast, we were talking about how this time period is such fertile imagination for stories. It's really wild to see stuff like that. Do you guys cross in stories of real stories that happened of the time into the stories that you're telling?
Oh yeah, we definitely want to do that. One of the stories in Liberty Comics number 1, or no, 0. Number 0 actually deals with VJ Day, what really happened on VJ Day that you didn't see in the pictures. I want to do other historical events too. There's a Liberty Girl story that takes place right when the announcement of the bombing at Pearl Harbor has occurred. And Liberty Girl's all afluster because this means war with Japan, and she thinks that we should be fighting Germany, right? The declaration of war from Germany hasn't happened yet, and Liberty Girl's all upset because she thinks this means our attention's going to be diverted away from the real problem. As it turns out, Hitler obliges Liberty Girl, and Liberty Girl actually has a hand in provoking Hitler into doing that in that story. So, yeah, I want to deal with historical events from the perspective of what it might have meant, how it might have happened in a world where superpowered people actually exist.
And how about the specialists? How do you guys deal with real-world events that have happened at the time?
Well, we really we don't really get a lot. We don't really. Well, like I said, our story starts after the war has ended, but also our story is really focused on our 8 characters, and it's very character based, and so we have a fairly we have our plot all laid out more or less over 12 chapters, so we don't really have a lot of that kind of interweaving of real people and events. If we were doing a sort of a more of a long-term, continuous kind of story, that kind of thing would probably be great to do. But in our case, we're basically focused on our heroes and villains specifically.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the characters that are represented in the specialists? I know I have my favorite. My favorite is Walter. Not because of the name, but just because of the fact that there's a lot going on with that dude.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about some of the characters and really what endears them to not only you but some of your readers?
Absolutely. So the first character I'll mention, because he's one that I feel like I pretty much. He was my idea. Whereas a lot when we started working on this, we both broke and said, okay, let's make up some character ideas and come back and compare notes. And like Al had this whole big list of things he'd created, and I had like just a little scrap of paper with a couple of notes that I jotted down. So Al was just way better at coming up with ideas than I was. But the one that I was really proud of was Max. Max Finkelstein is a 15-year-old genius inventor who, at the beginning of the story, he's created this robot, a combat robot called the Golem, and he's trying to sell it to the army, but he just can't get it working. He's up against a deadline, and he just can't make it actually move on its own. It's kind of got a very rudimentary artificial intelligence, but it cannot walk on its own. And so, in desperation, as his deadline is looming, he figures out a way to be able to pilot it from inside. And so he goes to this demonstration, and he's inside it, but no one knows that. And so it's a successful demonstration, but now he's stuck. Like, well, oh crap! Now I have to actually. The army wants this thing, and I have to kind of keep going with this. So he inadvertently ends up becoming a fighter in the war inside this robot tank. But what I like about Max is that he's very naive. He's kind of our audience or reader surrogate at the beginning, because he idolizes the specialist, especially Captain Victory, the leader, and he's really bought into all the comics and the radio serials, and he thinks it's just all very exciting, and so he's very excited to be able to go and meet his heroes and and then so when it all happens though, and then he ends up in combat, and nothing is the way he hoped it would be. Combat ends up being horrible. And the people, his heroes that he idolized so much, end up just being regular people who were flawed, and so just his whole journey is just coming to terms with reality and how much it differs from his fantasies. So he's probably one of my favorites. Al, you want to take one?
Well, you mentioned Walter, so I'll just give you the rundown on Walter. Is that he is his alter ego within the team is the Bombardier, and he wears this helmet. He's got a jetpack. He flies around, and the public only knows about this guy in a helmet and a mask. And there's all kinds of speculation as to who he is and why he wears the mask. Is he a robot? Is he horribly scarred? Is he this? Is he an alien? And it turns out that he's actually a black man in the 1940s in the army. He was a Tuskegee member of the Tuskegee Airmen, and he was the only person that managed to figure out how to operate the jetpack properly. So he's been recruited into this team, and because he's black, he can't reveal his identity to the rest of the world because the army obviously wasn't integrated at that point. It was still, to have a black airman serving alongside, white counterparts wouldn't have been tolerated. So, and he's forced to cover up who he is, and yet he still wants to be able to serve and do his part to fight the Nazis and protect the country that he loves, but he can't. Nobody can know that he's doing it.
And I should point out that at the beginning of our story, the specialists have been sort of relegated to being a propaganda tool, and so because they're so public, that's really why Walter can't be himself and be known as being a black man, because he's not just a soldier; he's a public figure, and so that's why they've forced him to hide who he is. Another character that has really surprised me a lot, and he's become a fan favorite, is Question Mark. This is one of Al's creations. He's an English super spy. When we started out, he was basically that was basically the concept. It was like he's an English super spy, and Al drew a picture of him. He's this cool-looking guy in a trench coat and a fedora, and he's sort of shadows cover his eyes. And that was pretty much all we had to work with. And when we started, I didn't really have a good handle on who he was going to be. And then as I came to write his first scene, I kind of had this idea for how he was going to behave and how I was going to introduce him. And it worked out pretty well, and I liked it, and I was able to come up with what I felt were some pretty good lines for him. He's got a lot of cool dialogue, actually. And so he's actually become a character that the fans just really, really love. And I have a good time writing him. And he's been a lot of fun. He's just sort of always like 2 steps ahead of everybody else. He knows everybody's secrets. He's unflappable and cool, and always has a good one-liner at the ready. But there's more to him, obviously, than that, and some of those other details will be revealed in time.
I really enjoyed his interaction with Hartman earlier on in the story, just because it was like, here's this dude, and I don't want to give too much away because, even though people can go to your to thespecialistcomic.com and read the story, you should have the enjoyment of seeing everything and stuff like that. But I really enjoyed his interaction with Hartman in the beginning because of the fact that it was so creepy. Here's this guy sitting in a cell for whatever, and he's all chained up, and all of a sudden there's this guy there. I mean, I mean, it's bad enough that you've been locked up and you think your life is over, and all of a sudden, poof, here's your genie. And that was a neat twist of the story.
Yeah, that was. I really liked the way that scene came together, and it really sort of helped solidify both who Mark and Hartman were for me, and their interaction. And I think one of the cool things about Mark is that he's really very unbiased and unprejudiced. Hartman, who I'll talk about Hartman next, but Hartman is he was a former Nazi who then gets turned into a monster man. So clearly, most people aren't don't trust him. They're afraid of him. And but Mark was just kind of, he sort of just he came in and didn't know much about the guy, so he didn't make any presuppositions, and they actually became sort of friends because he was one of the first people that would Mark was one of the first people who would actually talk to Hartman like a person. But so speaking of Hartman is he is one of a pair of twins, both Nazi soldiers who volunteered for this Übermensch program. It's a eugenics program put together by Dr. Metzger, who is sort of our analog of Josef Mengele. And the experiment goes terribly wrong. It does make him very strong and gives him claws, but he becomes a sort of monster man. He's sort of a werewolf-looking guy, a beast man, basically. And so once that happens, he realizes that the Nazis aren't really interested in him as a person. They just wanted a super soldier, and when he wasn't what they wanted, they were going to put him to death. So he ends up escaping, and knowing that his brother is also in line for this experiment, he escapes and tries to join up with the Allies so that he can work against the Nazis and try to help save his brother. So Hartman is very isolated in the team because most of the rest of the team don't trust him. And because now he's become monstrous, even without that history of being a Nazi, he would be sort of have a hard time fitting in. So he's sort of become a very tragic figure. He's trying very hard to undo the horrible things that he did in his past, or not to undo, but to make up for them, to redeem himself. But he's having a really hard go of it just because no one wants to give him a chance. So he's become a really great character too, and he's had some scenes that I was really proud of. He's had some very powerful scenes, and I really like the way that he's developed as well.
It's almost like it's a story of how far can you go before you think that you can't come back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely pretty wild. Speaking of bringing it back around again, so we've been talking about the specialists and the characters that really make this comic vibe. Dennis, can you tell us a little bit about the Vanguard of Freedom and some of the ways that they interact with Against the Axis?
Let's talk about that in the context of the Axis Kickstarter, shall we? In particular, the comic book that's going to be associated with that deals with the second wave of Vanguard heroes. In the beginning, the Vanguard of Freedom consisted of Dr. Arcane, an occultist, Giant, a super strong hero who has a magic harness that lets him tap into the power of the Greek gods, Roland Hunter, an international financier, and Britannia, the symbol of Britain. They came together when the Nazis sent a group of heroes to England to assassinate Winston Churchill, back in the days when Churchill was the only voice speaking out against Hitler and the Nazis. That didn't happen, not because the Vanguard were able to stop them, but because the Golden Warrior, who's the mother of Flair, when she was about to kill Churchill, looked into his eyes and realized that he had a destiny that would save Germany. Right? She was never a Nazi. The Golden Warrior was a German patriot. And when she saw that, she realized that Churchill needed to live. In the aftermath of that battle, the heroes who were in England, at the urging of Churchill, decided that somebody needed to be out there to stop the superpowered Nazis who were not as reasonable as the Golden Warrior. And that's how the Vanguard of Freedom was formed. The comic book that's associated with the Against the Axis Kickstarter will deal with the second wave of members of that organization. It tells the story of how Diamond Jim, Fletcher the Bowman, Liberty Girl, and Minuteman, who is one of Steve's characters, became affiliated with the Vanguard. The origin of Diamond Jim, the origin of Fletcher, and the origin of Minuteman are all revealed in that story. Minuteman is a time traveler from the future who was sent back in the past by Liberty Girl's father in order to help with World War II. Liberty Girl's origin has not been told. It will be told elsewhere, and I don't want to tell it here because I don't want to give that away. But she is, in fact, the daughter of a rather famous pulp hero of the era. Her bronzed skin and her widow's peak hairline might give a clue as to who that hero was, but we will never actually say so in the comic books because we don't have the rights to that character. You'll never see the full story unless and until we can make out a deal with the holders of those rights. Diamond Jim is a Coast Guard pilot in Chicago, or Stark City in Steve's world, who became infused with the power of mystical diamond. He cannot change back into human form without occult help. He decided to remain in diamond form because the world needs heroes. Fletcher the Bowman is a Hollywood movie cowboy who basically loved Indian culture and is highly skilled with the bow, with the tomahawk, with all Indian weapons, and could not convince his producer that a movie should be made with him in the Indian role because nobody would believe a movie cowboy is an Indian. When the Nazis come to Hollywood and engage in battle, he teams up with one of the vanguard and uses his skills to good effect. That's the story that you're going to see in that book when the Kickstarter for About the Axis is funded.
Excellent. Now, while we've been sitting here and we've been talking about a lot of these characters, I always get these flashes in my head. So, Liberty Girl, I'm thinking Jennifer Lawrence. For Walter, oh my God, if you do not cast Idris Elba as Walter. How about you guys? Do you guys ever think of, like who would we cast in the movie roles?
Oh yeah, we actually did a two-part blog post about this several years ago, and we kind of put together our dream cast for the entire comic. I think at the time, for Walter, I think that my favorite was oh God, I can't think of his name now.
Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Chiwetel Ejiofor. Yeah, the from Serenity and several other things. 12 Years a Slave.
Oh yeah, he'd be really good.
Mm-hmm. Who else do we have? Well, we also, when we did it, we kind of did like we took people from all walks, from all time periods. Like we kind of just said if we could take anybody from any point in their life, who would we take? So we didn't really take like current actors who could be could play those roles. So we really kind of cheated with that. But we had some good ones there. Like I think I liked Jude Law for question mark. And you know who would have been a really good Max is I don't know, I can't think of his name. Who's a kid from Rushmore? You know what I'm talking about?
Crickets, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, never mind. He was perfect.
How about a Dennis?
You ever thought
couple
about
of characters?
Yeah, actually, we're developing a series of Flair shorts right now, so there will be a Flair movie. The shorts are designed to link together so that by the time we're done with them, 5 to 8 minute shorts, you'll have a 2-hour movie. Flair's been cast. Her name is Valentina, and lovely young woman. We also have in mind, we haven't cast the Black Enchantress yet for that movie. If I had a choice for that, it would be that Russian girl who was on Lost Girl for several seasons, the one who played Kenzie. She would be a wonderful Black Enchantress, but so far we haven't been able to get in touch with her agent to see if she might even be interested. I doubt it, but it never hurts to ask. As far as the others, I don't really know. You used to play that game in the 60s. Who would you cast as Green Lantern? Who would you cast as the Flash? I never played that game. Until we're at the point where we actually need to worry about who we're casting, I don't even want to think about it. So I can't help you much. I do know that if we were to cast some name actress as Flair, there was somebody, I can't even think of who it was. There was somebody I thought would be wonderful for that, and I can't think who it was. I'm blanking on it. I'm so sorry. But
that's all right.
For me, it's not the World War II characters. It's not. Well, I should say it's not just the World War II characters. It's also the modern day characters. Almost all of them have some ties back into the past. So when I'm doing the World War II stories, I'm giving background, I'm giving history, I'm giving depth to the characters that we use in our modern day comic books. The sensational G-Girl, for example, whose very first issue appears this month later in February, is a third generation hero. She's the granddaughter of the original Giant. She's the daughter of his successor. There's a direct connection to the modern day Giant, which, if you've read any of your appearances in Champions, you may actually know about. But I want to save that for a surprise for people who haven't seen it yet. The connection between the third Giant and the G-Girl is very close. And I hope it will come as a surprise to people when they do pick up the book. So when I'm fleshing out the story of the original Giant, I am also fleshing out the story of the sensational G-Girl. In fact, there's a story of the original Giant that appears in that first issue of Sensational G-Girl, and that was a hoot to edit. I think Steve wrote that one. Steve Perrin. So
He's all over the place, that Steve Perrin.
Steve is a wonder. From the earliest days of fandom to today, he's always been there. Creative. He's created a couple of role-playing games for Chaosium and some others. I just wish he were here, and he weren't in there getting his back surgery today. But maybe we can have him some other time. I think that would be great.
Oh, absolutely.
We got how many days to go on the Kickstarter? Maybe he'll be available next week.
Yeah, we got a couple of weeks left, so we're good, and we can always plug into the YouTubes and have a hangout to where we can talk everybody up. And we actually got Steve up on the modern technologies, so we even saw his face last time. It was quite the thing. We're going to be starting to wind down now, so I was wondering, with the Specialist comic, you guys are on Kickstarter now. And the goal is to fund the omnibus, so to take this huge story that you have so far. It's the first 4 volumes that are being funded. Yep. And volume 5 is being written and produced right now on the web series.
Yep.
So people can continue after they read the omnibus, can continue with the story.
How many pages of story is the omnibus?
It's going to be about, it's 284 pages altogether. That includes about 20 pages of bonus material. So I think we have somewhere around 260 pages of actual comic story.
Yeah, it's huge. I've been like devouring it, and it's to sit down and read it page after page and not have to wait that week time span. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So to have the actual omnibus, I'm stoked. I can't wait. Can you talk about some of the stretch goals that you guys have planned?
So right now we have 2 stretch goals planned. The first one is just for a book plate. One of the problems with Al and I live in different states. I live in Colorado. Al lives in Ohio, and so there wasn't really a good way for us to be able to both sign the books for our backers. So having the book plate is a way that we can both put our signature in the book. If for anyone who wants that. So if we reach $7,000, which is $1,500 over our goal, we'll print this exclusive book plate. We'll both sign it, and we'll include that with all the physical books that we send out. We're getting close to 7,000 right now, so I think we have a pretty good chance of reaching that one before our 2 weeks are up. But the one that we're really excited about is if we reach $8,500, which would be $3,000 over our original goal. That's when we'll add an 8-page story drawn by Arvell Jones, a Bombardier story. So I'm really hoping we can reach that one. I think that will really elevate the book. It'll be something that even people who have our earlier chapter books would maybe want to have it just for that story.
And the great thing about it is, you guys have proven week after week that you can produce these. And so if there's any doubt at all, people should just take that doubt and throw it out the window and hit a Nazi in the head, because you guys are telling a fantastic story. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. Obviously you guys are going strong with this comic. How has the fan reaction been during cons and stuff?
You going to say something, Al?
I was just going to say, when we started doing this, we started doing it for ourselves. We just had a story, we wanted to tell it. was really the goal that we were trying to do. And once we got it out in the world and people started reading it, and commenting and talking to us about it, and we found out how much they were enjoying it, then it sort of it got beyond what our goals for it would be. And so now when we go to cons, one of the most gratifying things is having somebody who's read it online come up to us and say, "Oh my God, I'm the specialist. I love you guys." And meeting them and them meeting us, but there's also a lot of people that have no idea who we are and have never heard of the specialist, so we get to give them the pitch. We say, "Here's the book." They might buy the first chapter because they don't want to take a huge chance on buying 2 or 3 books at a time. They'll take it home, they'll read it, they'll come back to us the next day and say, "Oh, I got to have the rest of the book." That's a pretty nice perk of being able to go to cons and talk to people.
And we've been doing Denver Comic-Con now for the past few years, and what's been great is each year we've had another chapter out. We probably won't be able to have a whole new chapter out by Denver Comic-Con this year, but so the last few years we've had people who would have bought our first 1 or 2 books in the first year that we were there. Then they come back, they get the next book, and then they come back the next year, they get the next book, and so they actually are looking for us specifically because they want to get the newest book, and that's to have people who are faithfully following your work is amazing. That feels so good.
Nice. That's awesome. Dennis, do you have any con experience?
Yeah, I used to go to conventions all the time, but it was sort of dropped a little bit less because over the course of the past 10 years or so, most of the larger cons have sort of mutated into not comic book shows anymore, more like Hollywood shows for the most part. And where you used to be able to go to conventions and actually sell a few things and pay for the cost of the booth, that doesn't seem to be true very much anymore. It's disappointing. When I do go, I'll generally just get an artist table, not set up an entire booth, and just meet with the fans, because that's the important thing. Let your fans see you, talk to them, find out what they want, find out what they're interested in. And that's the convention experience that I like to come away with these days.
And what's the one thing they request all the time? So if you had like the quintessential heroic publishing title, what do you hand them?
Well, it's not so much if there's the one thing they request all the time, it's Flair, but they also request Mark Beecham. Right, Mark Beecham, one of the artists on Flair, is an artist. He just doesn't do much comic book work these days, but people want to meet him. So when he's there, we love it. But Mark doesn't like conventions for basically the same reason I don't go to very many anymore. He doesn't like going there to no great purpose if it's not, an opportunity to meet some people that he wants to meet. I would suggest also that we might want to talk about what comes after Against the Axis. I'm trying to twist Steve's arm to get him to do some source books featuring the family Arcane, a Flair source book, some other things that come out with icon stats. I think, as I said earlier in this, giving back to the role-playing community would be something I'd love to do. So if we can get to that point where we're producing some role-playing material utilizing heroic publishing characters on a fairly regular basis, I'd be down for that.
Now that I know that, we'll be talking. Too
Okay.
easy. Tying into that, would you guys on the Specialists like to see that converted over to, say, Savage Worlds?
Yeah, like I was saying before, that was kind of our original idea, and it just didn't come together. But it's something I've thought about a lot lately. Is trying to put it out as maybe even just a digital-only book or something. But right now I'm working on trying to get together some Savage Worlds stats. And there's no reason why it couldn't be, we couldn't translate it into other games as well. But yeah, I would actually like to put out a supplement for it. And I think if I did that, I'd probably, in addition to just including the stats for our characters, I might want to make it sort of more of a a
An
toolbox
adventure.
for. Well, yeah, sure. You kind of like a plot point adventure for Savage World or something, certainly. But I think I also might want to make it sort of a toolbox for, creating your own characters in our world. One thing that a lot of our fans ask is, are there super soldiers from Russia or from wherever they're from? And it's kind of, I know they get frustrated because we really only made super soldiers from Germany and the U.S. only because, like I said, we're sort of just telling this very sort of small-scale story about these characters, not because I don't think it'd be cool, if every country had their own very, nation-specific heroes. So anyway, I think I might, like to make it something where people who are interested in that kind of thing, I'd give them some guidelines for, how they could create their own little team of soldiers for whatever country they want. So anyway, those are some ideas I've kicked around.
And the cool thing is, with a role-playing game supplement, you could actually expand into those areas and gauge the interest at the tabletop, which might fuel some of your comic endeavors. So that's pretty cool too. Glad I do this show. Don't worry, we'll be talking. Before we call it a podcast, is there anything you guys would like to throw out to the fans, other than the fact that, Dennis, we have your great comics on the Against the Axis Kickstarter, which is
You need to include the website in the appendix. It's heroicmultiverse.com. People should go there. People should go there and see what we have to offer. There's a lot of interesting stuff up there that you don't see much in comic book stores around the country because we don't distribute through Diamond. We make the books available to people who want them, and we get most of our revenue these days through digital sales.
Nice. Yeah, right through Drive-Thru Comics, right?
Yeah, Drive-Thru Comics and through Comixology and a couple of other places, smaller ones. But if there is anybody out there who does digital comics who wants access to the Heroic Publishing titles, we'll be glad to give it to them.
Nice. The you guys also have G-Girl launching very soon. I saw that on the website earlier today, right?
Yes, and Flare is getting back in with new material in March. We have limited resources, so we can't do very many comics, but we try to do one or two new things every month. And with a few exceptions toward the end of last year, we've been able to keep that up. So we'll keep going, and as long as we get enough revenue to keep the stuff going, we will in fact keep it going.
Nice.
So.
Nice. How about it, guys, from the specialists? Anything you'd like to throw out as a final shot?
Well, we have some conventions coming up. We're going to be at Wizard World Cleveland the last weekend of this month, and then I've got a show here in Denver, which is actually you might be interested in this, Dennis. I mean, I don't know if you live around here, but the one that
I live in California.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was thinking that there might be sort of a new movement starting of comic shows going back to being comic shows. What I'm going to do next month here in Denver is called the Denver Independent Comics Expo, or DINK. But it is intended to be just for independent comics. So it's not going to have the Hollywood stars and that kind of thing.
Oh, good.
And it's the first time for this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what it's going to do. But
well,
I'm really
some information on it.
Yeah,
Please.
Absolutely. Yeah, you bet. But so anyway, we've got some conventions coming up, and we've got all of our whole schedule for this year listed on our website too.
That's fantastic. Please get me that information because I know a lot of indie creators that have both been on the show and that are scheduled to appear, and some of the guys that we follow regularly would love a show like that. Mm-hmm. So we'll put that in the show notes, and that way that'll hopefully increase the circulation for that as well.
Great.
Guys, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming out and speaking about the Heroic Publishing titles and speaking about the specialists. This has been a great show. So I'm fans of both these properties, and I can't wait to see what you guys have next.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Thank you so much. Great. And with that, I apologize. With Mike Lafferty, might have been kidnapped by aliens or Nazis or alien Nazis. I'm not going to keep going with that because it's just terrible. But this is Walt for the Bamf podcast, and we're signing out.